Morning everyone. We were always told in ADAS never to start a presentation with an apology in our sort of public speaking training. So I won't start by saying I'm sorry, I'm not Neil Bragg, you have to make do with me. I am the new improved Neil Bragg. So hopefully things will go according to plan. Just one caveat though, most of this presentation is obviously Neil's figures. I have put in one or two slides to update things, so there is facts and figures I'm presenting and may not necessarily be my own or the HDC's. I did put an alternative alternative title slide in here. Neil's original remit was challenges of developing responsibly sourced substrates for use in UK horticulture, which is a bit of a mouthful, so I sort of changed the ascent of growing media. So we're looking at the development of growing media from simple leaf mould mixers, John Innes, through to the current substrates we're using today in the various sectors. So a bit of a potted history to begin with. I think prior to 1930s, it was a bit of a mishmash in terms of what media was and wasn't used by the industry. It was all make it up yourself, so we had soil mixed with leaf mould, with rubble, with wood ash, manure, sand and grit. The one thing we didn't have was a standardised and sort of rational product being used by the industry in any sort of way, shape or form. This changed in the 1930s, towards in the 1930s, due to work by Lawrence and Newell, developing the John Innes mix. This came about primarily through trials they were doing there in genetics. And they wanted to make sure, so they could get the ratios correct, that any progeny from crosses actually grew. Because obviously if 50% of the plants die, then you don't know what part genetics is taking part in that particular sort of experiment. So from that they developed a standardised rational growing media based on peat, medium clay loam, sand, fertiliser, and so developed the John Innes seed and potting mixers. The problem with the mixers though was that obviously there is a limited loam source available. The loam itself needed steam sterilising, and obviously with loam being included in the actual overall mix, there's a problem with weight. So as things developed into the 1960s, what happened in America, at the University of California, where the UC system of growing media developed, which was based primarily on sand and peat with fertiliser. Again, came about to limit plant health issues, losses due to dying off, waterlogging, etc. And it just so happened that this work was picked up by workers at the Glasshouse Crops Research Institute, and they brought it back to the UK. So from the 1960s onwards, the UC sort of type mixers became dominant in the industry, and most people started to use a peat-based rather than a loam-based growing media. The problem with the peat back then was, unfortunately, it was poor grading of many peats. So there was issues with crops being grown outside, nursery stock being an example of waterlogging and winter losses. So what happened then in the 1980s is that we had Margaret Scott come along with a work on bark to sort of try and improve and open up mixtures so that they perform better. Along with this, we had Neil developing the AFP measurement, the airfield porosity measurement, so we could actually define the mixtures we're developing. So again, it was yet another step, another logical step towards fine-tuning substrates. Moving on to the 1990s then, the environmental lobbyists came along, started auditing peat use, and what we found as a result of this was that peat use started to be removed from certain substrates, primarily soil improvements and mulches. So there were changes afoot in the 1990s. On the back of that, we had the peat and its alternatives report by the HDC, and also the peat alternative manual by the Friends of the Earth. So things were moving in terms of developing and the environmental pressures on peat use. So in terms of actual overall peat use in the 1980s and 90s, as you can see from the slide, we had about 2 million cubic metres of peat being used in the 1980s, which increased to about 2.7 million in the 1990s. This was sort of split just about evenly between commercial growers and the amateur market, with a bit being made up for use in the amenity market. As you can see from the figures there, similar sort of levels of use in the Netherlands, But according to Neil's figures, we were dwarfed by the amount of peat being used in Germany. So you see there, compared to ours, 11.5 million cubic metres. This is in the sort of 1990s in Germany. So moving forward to 2000, having a 10-year sort of jump, I suppose relatively little has changed. We've got now a total peat consumption of about 3 million cubic metres, but the split has changed quite a bit. And what we've got now is only one, it's a sort of 2 to 1 between the amateur market and the commercial grower, sort of 2 to 1 million cubic metres, of which, because of the environmental lobbyists, we've now got a wide range of other materials being used primarily as soil improvers and mulchers. So peat wasn't being used in that area. We've got bark and other bits and pieces, green compost being used there as soil ameliorants and mulchers. He did put at the bottom a little snippet about information from RHP and the fact that, okay, the Netherlands are again using a similar amount, but the hobby market, the amateur market there, takes far less in terms of the peat use compared to the commercial market, commercial grow market there. So moving again slightly forward, 2011, peat use is still around about 3 million, the amateur market 2.2. But what we're now finding is that within that particular market, the multi-purpose, grow bags, etc., we are seeing peat being substituted by other materials. So Neil's listed there between 20 and 80% peat reduction. Commercial growers, about 0.8 million. Again, substrates, sort of peat substitution, between 10 and 50%, depending which sector we're talking about. This one is my slide I've put in. DEFRA, over the last few years, every 3 or 4 years, have actually undertaken a growing media analysis of the market. They go around using an independent contractor to see how much peat, how much other substrates they used, and to monitor the peat use. This came to an end recently, so the HTA, HDC and DEFRA have now funded a project which is CP100, tracking peat use in grain media production. The report for this is on the HDC website this week. We've just cleared the report. So these are the figures which are slightly different to what Neil's shown, but they're in a similar sort of ballpark figure. 2011 we had 1.8 million cubic metres into the retail market, 0.9 is the commercial market. This then fell to 1.39 in retail and 0.83 in commercial. So as it says there, 12% fall in growing media between the 2 years and an overall fall in growing media, not peat, from 4.4 to 3.95 million cubic metres. So you might think if you're DEFRA, yippee, great, here we go, we're having an impact. Unfortunately, it's difficult to sort of say how much of this is actually a trend, an underlying trend with a move away from peat, and how much is an influence of the weather, both in plant sales and in terms of harvesting peat. In those 2 particular years, peat harvesting was pretty poor. There was substitution going on. So it was probably a good thing we did have other materials around to substitute. The peat harvest for 2013 has been better, so it'd be interesting to see what happens to these figures in the next report as to whether it goes down and then comes back up again. So looking at the alternatives to peat from 1990 onwards, I think to begin with, we were in the HDC, they were undertaking trials on a very wide range of materials there. You can see coir, various wood waste, mineral waste, food byproducts, spent mushroom, chopped straw, sewage, municipal waste, even things like carpet shearings and other bits and pieces. So it was very much in its infancy. There were fairly basic materials, large problems and issues occurring on a regular basis. So things like coffee grounds, for instance, they were very easily fermentable. Sewage may have been the right colour and been free-flowing, but there's a perception problem, problems with heavy metals, and the availability of materials all year round. You know, carpet shearings may have some particular use, but were they available all year round? So what's happened since then is that there's been a filtering of the materials, and we've moved away from sort of 15, 20 basic materials to a range of materials which we've done much more work on and are much more sophisticated, but I'll come to that in due course. So moving to 2003, Neil's picked out just a few front runners there. One of the products which performed well in trials was the timber and wood derived byproducts, of which in 2003 he estimated there was around 1.8 million cubic metres available. At that time, primarily sold into the amateur market and also in the amenity and landscapes. He did put a footnote there, back by 2010, this figure actually doubled, and it's becoming much more of an important product in terms of substrate development. There was at the time problems with alternative markets for that, fuels and material going elsewhere, which there is with many other products. Coir, back then, Neil estimated in 2003 about 40,000 cubic metres used in the UK. Very good and still is for propagation mixtures, issues in terms of non-indigenous material, quality of water used to wash the material, and you're getting saline contamination, reliability of supply, and can they actually use it in the third world as an organic material themselves. Other materials which sort of fell by the way during this period, sewage, as I mentioned, the perception problems unfortunately we couldn't get over, contamination issues in municipal solid waste, sharps and viruses, spent mushroom compost, high lime if casing was included, high ammonia, hop waste, limited quantities, coffee bean waste, now being sold as a fuel, cocoa bean waste, good as a mulch, paper waste, massive amounts, fresh and recycled. I see most of that now going into soil conditioner rather than into growing media as such. So moving forward to 2012, the front runners now basically consist of 4 products which have been researched quite heavily over the last 10 years, and we now have, as I said before, more sophisticated products. We don't have the issues we had 10 years ago. We've learned quite a lot about the materials. Whether any will be a direct substitution for peat is debatable, on whether we have to sort of mix various amounts together, whether we combine coir and bark or coir and bark with a bit of peat. That's all work to be done. But in 2012, Neil mentions again problems about harvest volume and international competition for product with coir. I've listened to Tom speak before, and he's mentioned the fact that it's more of an issue getting coir out of the country. It's the infrastructure in the likes of India and other developing countries. So the material is there. It's getting it from where it's harvested to ports to get it out of the country. Barks, Catherine may wish to comment later on about the influence of the economic collapse of the building market in Spain, the effect of the higher prices, limited quantities, etc. So again, there are issues there with barks, but again, they are becoming a dominant alternative substrate to peat. And the other two, wood fibre and green waste. Wood fibre has come along fairly recently compared to the others. There are issues in terms of what do we mean by what is a wood fibre. There are products on the market which are heat treated and expanded, and there are other products which are simply chipped. They do behave in slightly different ways, need handling in different ways, so definition of wood fibres needs to be addressed at some point. We now have past 100 in terms of green waste quality standards, but we still have issues over variability of materials, contamination with chlorized glass, and recently with herbicide contamination with clopyrrolid, although there is RAP funded work on that at the moment to sort of try and get to the bottom of that and sort that issue out. So those are the main materials on the market at the moment in terms of the potential alternatives to peat. Neil's just put a few slides in to sort of go through some of the trials that have been undertaken. As it is a Bull Rust presentation, he's got a few slides of Forest Gold Plus there at 25%. Sorry? So this is a trial undertaken in 2010 at Ball Colgrave, looking at 25% wood fibre mix. Worked pretty well in both pot and pack on bedding. You can see the root system there developed quite well. No problems in terms of the top growth. And even at 60%, it was still performing quite well, reasonable root growth there relative to peat. So the wood fibres has performed quite well. Slightly different, this was a Link HDC funded work from 2007 to 2010 looking at food processing waste undertaken at the Institute of Food Research Trials in Norwich. So what we have here is a trial showing on this side, on the left, that's a wood fibre based compost. That is a green compost based one, and this has got various different mixes using 75% material developed from the food processing waste. As you can see, there is some variability in there. Looking at the top growth, you can see the nitrogen coming out of the green compost has worked quite well, and that looks quite a nice lush plant, good leaf development, good structure about it. Looking at the roots, a slightly different picture in that the wood fibre, decent roots there. The green waste, slight shrinkage there. The thing is still active and is decaying, and less root. And throughout the other three substrates containing the food processing waste, again, the root development not quite as good as the wood fibre based one. So we've got to look at both the top growth and the root growth before making decisions going forward in terms of which substrates to develop. So coming on to the old point of the presentation, which is what are the challenges going forward about substrates? Well, I think these came about because of the white paper issued in 2011, which for the first time actually specified targets. Peat was the only element within the natural paper which actually specified targets, and as you're all aware, there was 3 targets. 2015, with all government and local authority purchased plant material needs to be peat free. 2020, the amateur product needs to be peat free. And for you guys, 2030 is the date, commercial horticulture needs to be peat free. So those are the ones that have caused a lot of discussion and debate over the last year. I'll go into the task force and the discussions around that, but those are the targets which are driving the actual issues at the moment. You could argue these are political issues, not technical issues, because in Europe they're taking a much more pragmatic approach to peat reduction, and the Netherlands are looking at sustainable use of peat. They see peat very much as still the #1 substrate, and it's the way it's harvested from various sources and how that's managed which is more important than perhaps looking at alternatives. So we need to get together with Europe at some point to sort of get some common theme together in the development of substrates. So in terms of the DEFRA response to this, how were they going to get the industry and the amateur market to sort of meet these targets they set? Well, the response was to pull together a task force which included industry, growers, retailers, non-government organisations, RSPB, to look at the targets and what needs to be done within the industry. This was chaired by Dr. Alan Knight, who was ex-B&Q, who's a corporate sustainability consultant. It's quite a huge problem, to be quite honest. We've been trying, as you can see from the previous slides, 20-30 years of research have been trying to address this problem. So how can we do this and solve this problem relatively overnight? One of the things Dr. Alan Knight suggested was that we break down the actual issue into 12 bite-sized projects. So within the task force, we each sort of given various elements to look at in terms of issues within the growing media supply chain, the use of the media, how it's developed, the sustainability of it, and we were tasked to sort of go away and look into this. In a nutshell, we got back to the government in 2012. Richard Benyon responded to the task force saying we set out a roadmap, which I'll cover in a moment, of how we're going to achieve that and how the industry is going to move forward. I think one of the things that Dr. Alan Knight did during this year period was to try and move the debate from peat bad, non-peat good, to an argument about, well, initially it was sustainable sourcing of media, which became responsible sourcing. I think trying to define sustainability in terms of peat, well, in anything is very difficult, but in peat was very difficult. So what the emphasis moved to was a move away from sustainable sourcing to responsible sourcing. So what are the current goals at the moment according to the task force? Well, we set out sort of 7 or 8 goals we are now working towards with various bits of work, which again I'll cover in a moment. But obviously all growing media needs to be fit for purpose. That's the #1 goal moving forward. Growing media and raw materials should be made from environmentally and socially responsibly sourced and manufactured. And commercial horticulture only uses such sourced and manufactured material in growing media. Retailers to sort of take their part in the actual development, also only to stock products which meet performance standards and are suitably sourced. At the moment, there's work going on in the public sector to make sure that sourcing plants for government and local authorities, again, is suitably sourced media. There are talks about assurance schemes and various bits and pieces to make that happen. And to allow consumers to make informed choices about their purchase. Again, I'll come back to that in a moment. Improve quality and consistency of green compost, so that's used to fulfill its potential. Again, that is ongoing. And an issue about liaising with the Environment Agency to make sure that the waste legislation is no longer a barrier to sourcing high quality waste-derived products. The outcome of which is basically a voluntary approach to deliver the transition to sustainable growing media for use in horticulture. So it's not going to be a compulsory forced upon us. It's something we all need to work together, and Alan Knight sort of recognises from the outset it needs to be a voluntary approach by everybody throughout the supply chain to make this happen. So what's happening in terms of future projects? The 3 current key projects which came out of the work were basically one which is still termed Project 4, which is still awaiting an official title, which was looking at the sustainability, the responsibly sourced growing media. What constitutes responsible sourcing? What do we need to look at? How do we inform people about that? The project group is looking at the environmental impact, the social impact, the recycling ability, the pollution, and all these sort of things in terms of whether it's coir, bark-based or peat-based, and try and compare like for like. I think the overall idea of the project was to sort of try and develop something rather like the coding you get on white goods in terms of energy efficiency, to see whether it's a green, amber or red type product. So this is still all ongoing. The project is still trying to develop this measure of responsibly sourcedness, if you like, and to get the idea, first of all, into the amateur market, and then to bring that to the commercial growing media, to give you the chance to choose a growing media which you want, which you feel meets your requirement in terms of your business image, in terms of sustainability. The second element, the second strand of the work is probably currently focused more towards the amateur market, which is to making sure that it actually does what it says on the bag. So it's measuring the performance to make sure that all the various multi-purpose composts actually do produce plants of a decent quality, meet the needs of the consumer time and time again. So that is a work which is the HTA is driving, is on course and developing at the moment. The third strand is probably the one that will have most impact on you guys, which is one I've been tasked to pull together. The tender has gone out, and we're awaiting the final project proposals coming in on this. It's a 5-year programme of work to get the knowledge to you guys, to give you the confidence to use this growing media. So it's moving towards again, it's fancy terminology, transition to responsibly sourced growing media within UK horticulture. But it's basically giving you guys the confidence to adopt. What do you need from the growing media manufacturers? What do you need in terms of R&D? What do you need in terms of knowledge transfer for you to go out and be able to use substrates which contain more alternative materials and less peat? So within the project 3, these were the objectives I set within the tender. So they're fairly broad brush, because I wanted to sort of find out what ideas the researchers had bringing to the table. So the first one is a bit of a summary. It's going back over history and identifying where we are at the moment. So what are the needs of the horticultural sectors, not only yours, but the veg industry, mushroom sector, strawberry production, etc. And then trying to find a system to readily match your requirements to those raw materials. Not going straight into trials. Is there a system, a methodology, where we can test these raw materials, to make sure that they meet your needs before we go into trials work? Can we identify and address any issues which may occur in terms of availability, consistency, price and practical use? That is a sort of never-ending, always changing sort of set of parameters, but we don't want to sort of go with media which may fall short in the near future because of price, because of availability, because of public perception. We need to make sure that we actually back the winner. Examine the impact of media use throughout the whole supply chain. So we're not looking at does it actually grow in there, but does it still have the shelf life? Do plants actually establish in the gardens afterwards? It's just looking at the whole impact of growing media throughout the supply chain itself. Formulate a programme of work to demonstrate this. So that's in essence bringing it all together to convince you guys this is how it's going to work. So this is basically the whole main key behind this, which is a sort of it's an adoption. It's to convince you, to give you the confidence to sort of use these materials, and this will be communicated in publications, through demonstrations, technical events, etc. So these things have yet to be decided, but this will form part and parcel of the 5-year piece of work once we decided on which of the project proposals were successful. With regards to that, the process will be the end of this month is the closing period for the tenders. We'll be reviewing them through October. We'll make a decision following interviews at the end of October, and hopefully, if we can come to some agreement on the successful tender, work will commence the first part of 2014 onwards. 5-year piece of work, as I say, it's looking primarily at knowledge transfer with appropriate research and development as required. In terms of conclusions, I think what Neil wanted to get across was we need to sort of try and keep the momentum going. It's so easy for these projects to start, people to be interested in them, get them initiated, and then for the momentum to disappear. So we need to make sure that that keeps going. This 5-year development programme needs to be supported by the industry to ensure that, to keep things going. We need to get out of it as much as possible. So please feel free to feed into me. There will be a project steering group for that to make sure it develops in the way we want to sort of see it developed. So if you're interested in joining that, please come and see me at the end. And as I said before, it's not focused to any one particular sector. It is a cross-sector project. We are wanting to get substrate adoption across the board, not only at manufacturers but also at growers and retailers and through to the final consumer, because only that way can we actually make alternative substrate adoption actually work within the entire supply chain. I have brought with me a dozen copies of the HDC review. This was published in 2012, but it does highlight all the work the HDC has done over sort of 15 years or so. So if you would like a copy of that, I've got a dozen of them here at the front.